here. What even is the River Raisin? Is this a place where we have the California raisins taking a bath? No, this is a small stream that is located in Michigan. And along this waterway, two engagements of the War of 1812 occurred and a massacre that would change the course of American history. Now, I enjoy talking about the War of 1812. Just a few weeks ago, we were talking about Dartmoor Prison on here and how American prisoners were held there during the War of 1812. Well, in the early phases of this conflict, the part of the war was involving the Michigan Territory because it sits right along the Great Lakes, which were key for controlling North America between the United States and Britain. Remember, Britain still had possession of Canada at this time. Pretty early in the war, the British were able to outmaneuver American forces and capture Fort Detroit, which was quite the embarrassment to the United States of America. Hardly a shot was fired when General Hull surrendered at garrison. And General William Henry Harrison wanted it back. He wanted this garrison back. So what he's going to do, he is going to launch a counterattack first at Fort Wayne, Indiana, which he will capture in the late summer of 1812. He's going to move an American army up to Toledo, Ohio, and from there he is hoping to launch a campaign into Michigan. The problem is winter set it in, but he and the United States desperately want to wipe away the blunder that was the loss of Fort Detroit. So they're willing to gamble a winter campaign. Now, the problem was General Harrison, and yes, this is the Harrison that one day becomes president of the United States, shortest tenured president, 3 weeks, died of pneumonia. No joke. Story for another day. There was a conflict of interest in who was commanding the American forces along the Maumee River. Now, originally, the commander was a guy by the name of General Winchester. Winchester, boy, he didn't have a good military career. Get a load of this. So, Winchester, he served in the War of Revolution. Well, that is one way to call the American Revolution. He served in the Revolution. One of his first campaigns was in 1777 during a Patriot raid on British-held Staten Island. It didn't go well. Poor Winchester became a prisoner of war. He was exchanged and would be sent to fill the garrison of Charleston, South Carolina in 1780, which, for the record, was the scene of the largest American surrender during the Revolutionary War. So that's 2 times our friend Winchester has been captured. So yeah, he had a pretty rough outing first time in the military dress. Second time out, he was brigadier general, but Harrison was major general. Technically, by rank, Harrison was a superior commander, but Winchester was his senior in terms of years be alive. So for that reason, Winchester felt that he was by default the true leader of the American forces along the Maumee River. And when a letter entered Winchester's camp that came from settlers living in a small community in the Michigan Territory called Frenchtown, they appealed to Winchester to send them aid, that they wanted to get rid of the British garrison that was in the nearby area. Remember, Britain had essentially invaded the Michigan Territory in 1812, capturing Detroit, and had controlled this whole region. There were still American citizens in this area. The Michigan Territory, should also be remembered, was still being settled. Most of Michigan's population were not American citizens, but rather were from a variety of indigenous tribes. Those include the Ottawa, the Ojibwa, the Potawatomi. There were some Wyandot also, and Miami also living in this region. And also, reasons called Frenchtown, there was still a variety of settlers that drew their ancestry from French Canadian settlers going back to the 18th century. Well, Winchester gets this appeal for help, and what is he? How is he not going to respond to Americans in need? So he is going to send out about 500 Kentucky riflemen, and they're going to go into Michigan. They're going to cross the River Raisin, and they're going to enter Frenchtown on January 18th, 1813. And by doing so, they're going to come into contact with the British and Amerindian forces that are in the surrounding area. Skirmishing in the woods north of Frenchtown ensued, and although the Kentuckians are not able to drive the British all the way from Frenchtown, they do enough to feel confident that they have secured a town and message Winchester to send reinforcements so they can anchor their liberated front, as it were. So General Winchester, still, he's not really following orders from Harrison. Harrison told him stay at the Maumee River. Winchester's doing all this stuff in Michigan. Winchester is going to lead another 500 soldiers, this time including regular U.S. infantry, the 17th Infantry, and they're going to make their way to Frenchtown. Now, the British commander in the region who was stationed in the Michigan Territory was Henry Proctor. And boy, Henry Proctor was not going to let some Kentucky riflemen reclaim the Michigan Territory in the dead of winter. So after the first battle of Frenchtown on January 18th, Proctor gathered reinforcements, which included over 600 British regulars, Canadian militia, British Royal Artillery. They're also going to rely on hundreds of native warriors to support this recapture of Frenchtown. In the early morning hours of January 22nd, 17. Oh, nope, not 17. I was going so good, and then I just went off the rails. That's what happens on this channel. Well, in the early morning hours of January 22nd, 1813, Proctor is going to move from the north toward Frenchtown. Now, he very quickly sets up a perimeter that surrounds Frenchtown from the west, north, and east. And though he numerically is about even to the Americans, let's be honest here, Kentucky riflemen, while they might have great accuracy, discipline, a whole different story. Same thing with the 17th Infantry. The United States Infantry at the start of the war of 1812, they had the same amount of discipline as the Dallas Cowboys did this past weekend. All right, to make you guys feel better. The 17th Infantry had the same discipline as the Pittsburgh Steelers did this past weekend. There, we even? Okay. So, while they're numerically matched, the British definitely have the advantage of discipline. They also have the support of the indigenous population on their side. They know the terrain like the back of their hand. Now, they are not going to completely surprise the American garrison. The American sentries around Frenchtown noticed this British presence starting to come down upon them in the dawn light and are going to beat the drum, beat the American garrison to quarters. The British realize their cover is about to be blown, and they start making a fast-paced frontal assault out of the woods from the north toward Frenchtown. Now, Frenchtown's a very interesting battlefield, and I wanted to get an image displayed that I found earlier, but I just couldn't find good enough a quality of it. So hopefully in the future, if I decide to clip this segment, I can superimpose it right now because it's a very interesting lay of the land. So from north to south, you got the forest, you got a ravine, then you got relatively open ground where Frenchtown itself actually sits. And on Frenchtown's north and west side, these settlers had set up a very thin fence line. Now, it didn't run around the whole village, but it protected the northwest corner. And the Kentucky riflemen are going to use that to their advantage as a makeshift fortification, as well as using the homes as protection for their bodies. So there were instances where they're using the buildings as shelter from enemy fire. Then as you move further south out of town is where you actually have the River Raisin. And across the River Raisin is where General Winchester had his headquarters along with the 17th Infantry. So Proctor's coming down from the north. He is stopped by the Kentucky riflemen because they have some protection with that wall. Meanwhile, to the east, the Canadian militia and of native warriors that are attacking on the eastern flank, well, there's no wall on that side. And they also find the 17th Infantry really aren't ready for a battle. And although Winchester tries to send them out to deal with the militia and the warriors, again, the warriors, they know the region, they know the terrain, they're the superior fighters. The militia, they're learning from the warriors. The 17th Infantry, they're no match for them. The infantry, lose their morale very quickly, break and run in all directions, and the eastern flank entirely dissolves the American force. They fall back across the River Raisin as the Canadians and the warriors are giving chase across the river behind them, trying to capture and kill as many as they can unless they surrender. Winchester himself is going to be caught up in this rout on the eastern flank and made prisoner for the third time in his military career. Oh, poor Winchester. Now, while this disaster was unfolding to the southeast in the actual town of Frenchtown, in the actual community of Frenchtown, the Kentucky Riflemen are still doing a pretty good job holding the British and their artillery at bay. Even as the artillery is getting pretty close and they're able to put it on the west side and on the north side, and since the eastern flank is dissolved, they're able to bring them almost into the rear of Frenchtown. They're refusing to give. They're refusing to hold out. Eventually, after about 2 hours of fighting, the British come up with an idea to send Winchester himself out. Remember, he's now a prisoner of war. To tell the Kentucky garrison inside Frenchtown to lay down their arms. It's over. The regulars have fled. You're completely surrounded, and everybody inside debated. On one hand, yeah, they realize by now, look, our ammunition's running low. It's only a matter of time before they get into our rear. But we don't want to be in the hands of native warriors. And the reason for that is, well, you're probably already aware that well over 100 years now, there has been this trend of colonists and indigenous population going to war with each other and indiscriminately killing each other for control over North America. And I have to deal with my cat. Yes, the angry evil one, not the curious one like Fred. That's the gray one you occasionally see in the background, the one that was knocking the bags down in the intro. No, we're talking about the evil one known as Lily. Yeah, she never looks happy, even though she's well fed, well groomed. She gets all of her treats at all times, constant attention. I promise we give her attention. She's allowed to lay on the bed. She's allowed to lay everywhere. You know. I'm getting distracted. Back to Frenchtown, back to the River Raisin. So they didn't want to deal with the possibility that if they're captured by native warriors, the native warriors are going to kill them all as retribution for previous aggressions. After some finagling with Henry Proctor, terms of surrender are established, and the Kentucky Riflemen agree to surrender, ending the Battle of Frenchtown, or some call it the second engagement at Frenchtown. But that's not where our story ends. So as the smoke clears, there were over 900 American casualties. That's including killed, wounded, and captured. We're looking at about 300 killed, and we're looking at about 500 to 600 that were taken prisoner, with about another 100 that were wounded. Essentially, the whole fighting force that was involved at Frenchtown was captured. Although it is stated about 30 of the American regulars managed to fall all the way back to the Maumee River and report to General Harrison what Winchester had got himself involved with in Michigan. That must have been a fun conversation. On the British side, casualties were comparatively lighter. They had suffered about 200 casualties collectively. Most of those casualties were incurred when they were trying to assault the north and west side of Frenchtown. Well, Proctor gets a word in that there is an American presence nearby. Proctor thinks that Harrison is coming to reinforce Winchester. That, as we already mentioned, Winchester moved up to reinforce the Kentucky Riflemen. Well, Proctor's on an impression this is part of a succession of American reinforcement, that Harrison is now making his full-fledged attempt to recapture Michigan right now in the dead of winter. So Proctor's a little nervous, and he doesn't want to be around if Harrison's about to show up here in Frenchtown. So he decides, all right, everybody all you Americans that could walk, you're coming with me. You're prisoners. We're taking you up to Fort Detroit, and then we'll take you up and transfer you across fortifications in Canada. Probably maybe some of them ended up all the way in Dartmoor, all the way in England. Who knows? Meanwhile, we have those that are unfit to walk, unfit to make a treacherous walk, You remain here. I'm going to keep a small guard of about 20 British soldiers to protect you guys until proper help can come, be it me coming back or Harrison coming in and capturing my own guard. Oh, maybe that wasn't a greatest idea. So, on the night of late January 22nd, Proctor and the British Army leave, escorting about 500 American prisoner of war, leaving about 100 American prisoner of war to be guarded by 20 British sentries, and these wounded prisoners of war were being taken care of by the population of Frenchtown. So they were taken into the homes, and the town had turned into a hospital, essentially. Well, on January 23rd, 1813, the following morning, a group of native warriors returned to the scene. I've seen different tribe names thrown out. I know the Wyandotte name has popped up numerous times. I don't know if they're the only ones involved with what follows. They had returned expecting to face off against Harrison because, hey, that's why Proctor up and left. So these warriors, perhaps these were some warriors that really did get involved with the action on January 22nd. They're like, all right, we're going to go fight Harrison, the main army. This is going to be great. And they arrive and they realize, oh, Proctor ran away. There's nobody here. Harrison's not here. Proctor's gone. Well, we're just wasting our time. We have nothing to show for it. So frustrated, they start going through Frenchtown and plundering anything they can find that was loose, including prisoners of war. So they start they go from plundering equipment to plundering American prisoners of war. Those that are able enough to be taken away, they're taken into captivity by these native warriors, which was custom for a variety of tribes to take captives to replace ones lost in combat or of illness. As for those that were unfit to walk, they killed them, as some describe it as systematic killing. Now, we're unsure of how many people were killed. Accounts vary from it being as low as a dozen men to as high as 100. And that would mean the whole prisoners plus the British sentries, which isn't true. So there is dispute over the actual fatality rate of what became known as the River Raisin massacre. In any case, it didn't matter if it was one person killed or 100 killed. The word got out that American prisoners of war being protected by British sentries were allowed to be massacred. And their story ran wild that the British did nothing to stop the native warriors, or as they would have worded them at the time, calling them savages, dehumanizing these warriors, these people part of tribes that lived in the Michigan territory that was under dispute at this point. And this is going to infuriate Americans on the East Coast, reading about all these horrible things that have been happening since the War of 1812. First, the loss of Fort Detroit. Now, this big River Raisin massacre. And the River Raisin massacre is going to become a big propaganda boon for the American war effort, trying to entice people to recruit and enlist in the war effort. Like, hey, you got to avenge those losses at the River Raisin. And later in 1813, Harrison and other American forces are going to see their campaigns renew in the Michigan Territory and along the Great Lakes. In September of 1813, a American fleet led by Commodore Perry is going to defeat a British fleet in the Battle of Lake Erie. And then in October of 1813, American forces are going to attack a British and native force at the River Thames. This will lead to the death of what was generally seen as the leader of the Northwest Confederacy, Tecumseh. And what was the rallying cry that the American army used that day? Remember the raisin, remember the raisin. And thus was born the first battle cry, or what some consider the first battle cry in American military history. Now, it wouldn't stop there, the memory of the River Raisin. When it came to the Treaty of Ghent, or Treaty of Ghent, I always debate, is it Ghent or Gent? After the Treaty of Ghent, and in future dealings over land in North America, you're always going to see the River Raisin brought up, especially when you're going to have American commissioners going out and buying the land from native tribes so the United States can expand. rhetoric relating to the River Raisin is always brought up. So it left a very it left a very bad stain on United States and Native American relations. Ironically, for as impactful as this was for the 19th century, it's hardly talked about today. The River Raisin has been brushed under the table, and there's a combination of reasons as to why. For one, this was an American defeat, a very bad American defeat, as we've talked about from a tactical perspective. There's also the fact that the War of 1812 overall tends to be forgotten, both by the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Both countries are kind of like, oh yeah, we fought that little thing in 1812. Why do we do that again? The Napoleonic Wars are more cool to look at. Look at those cool uniforms over there. And there is also the fact that uh, you're also dealing with the fact that a lot of stuff dealing with native tribes in the United States, it really a lot of it tends to a lot of it's shown for a very fine lens. You only get a very finite perspective. And it's only been the past few years that we begin a more all-encompassing view of how native life impacts all of North American history, indigenous life, native life, Amerindian life. It never fails that whatever term I use, the academics get angered, making my life very, very fun.